What is unfolding around Venezuela is not simply a regional crisis or another episode in US-Latin America relations. The reported US military strike and capture of Nicolás Maduro represents a rupture with consequences that extend far beyond Caracas. At stake is not only the fate of one government, but the future of sovereignty, energy geopolitics, and global strategic restraint in an already fragile international order. Since the end of the Second World War, the international system has rested on a basic bargain. States are sovereign, borders are inviolable, and force is restricted except in self-defense or with international authorization. Whatever one thinks of Maduro's rule, the unilateral removal of a sitting head of state and his transfer to foreign soil for trial cuts directly against that post-war framework. Once such an act is normalized, the protection offered by sovereignty weakens for all states, especially smaller and weaker ones. Supporters of Washington's action argue that Venezuela is a special case, pointing to long-standing US indictments accusing Maduro of narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. But this argument exposes a dangerous precedent. If criminal allegations alone justify military abduction, the line between law enforcement and war disappears. International law does not permit states to enforce domestic criminal charges through armed force inside another sovereign country. Accepting such logic opens the door to selective and politically motivated uses of force. History offers warnings. The 1989 US invasion of Panama and the capture of Manuel Noriega occurred in a unipolar moment when American power faced little resistance. Even then, it remained controversial and never evolved into an accepted norm. In today's multipolar world, marked by US-China rivalry, a grinding war in Ukraine, and Middle Eastern volatility, the systemic costs of repeating such actions are far greater. Beyond legality, Venezuela matters because of energy. The country holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. If Venezuelan production is revived and integrated into global markets, oil prices could fall meaningfully. That shift alone would reshape global politics. Oil is not just an economic variable. It is a strategic one that determines who can afford war, stability, and influence. Benchmarks matter. At around $80 per barrel, oil exporters such as Saudi Arabia are comfortable, Russia can fund its war effort, and inflation pressures constrain Western risk-taking. At $65 to $70, the balance begins to shift. Russia's revenues tighten, Western economies breathe easier, and US policymakers become more strategically permissive. Below $60, the effects turn destabilizing. Russia faces acute fiscal stress, Gulf states struggle to fund domestic agendas, and geopolitical restraint weakens across multiple regions. This is why Venezuela matters to the Ukraine war. Russia's budget depends heavily on oil and gas income. Sustained prices below $65 significantly narrow Moscow's capacity to finance a prolonged conflict. Cheap oil becomes an indirect but powerful sanction, strengthening the Western position without additional military escalation. From Washington's perspective, lower oil prices reduce inflation at home while simultaneously squeezing adversaries abroad. The Middle East experiences a more dangerous paradox. For producers like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, oil prices below $70 strain budgets and delay diversification plans. At $55 to $60, fiscal pressure becomes politically sensitive. These states have long acted as financial stabilizers during regional crises, using oil wealth to dampen unrest and influence outcomes. Cheap oil erodes that stabilizing capacity precisely when regional tensions are rising. This erosion feeds directly into the Iran-Israel dynamic. One of the strongest brakes on escalation in the Middle East has been fear of oil market shocks. A regional war that sends prices above $100 per barrel carries global economic consequences and invites intense external pressure for restraint. If oil is abundant and prices are already low, that brake weakens. Conflict becomes more affordable for the global system, even if it remains devastating locally. For Israel, cheap oil lowers the perceived global cost of confronting Iran. For Iran, lower prices compound economic pressure from sanctions, increasing regime stress and the temptation to externalize conflict through proxies. The result is not stability, but heightened risk of miscalculation. Energy abundance, paradoxically, makes escalation more thinkable. International reactions reflect these anxieties. Latin American governments fear a return to conditional sovereignty. Europe emphasizes international law, wary of precedents it cannot control. Russia and China seize the moment to argue that the United States applies rules selectively, undermining its moral authority. In the Middle East, the lesson drawn is blunt. Alignment with Washington does not guarantee protection if strategic interests shift. Ultimately, Venezuela matters because it sits at the intersection of law, power, and energy. If this episode accelerates lower oil prices, it will reshape conflicts from Ukraine to the Persian Gulf. If it normalizes the erosion of sovereignty, it will hasten the drift towards a world governed less by rules than by leverage. History will judge this moment, not by the fate of one leader, but by whether it marked the point at which energy abundance began to make instability affordable and restraint optional.